Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are Our Revolution, and we are bringing you a show through Progressive Washington and Uphill Media. As you know, with Our Revolution, we are organizing a political revolution to challenge the power of the plutocrats and prioritize the needs of people and our planet. With your support, we are building a national grassroots movement of local groups powerful enough to win progressive issue fights, elect progressive champions, transform our political system, and get big money out of politics. Today's show is called Armchair Series. It is regarding mutual aid in the time of COVID-19. Today we have Jason Call. He's running for Congress in Congressional District 2 here in Washington State. Christopher Armitage is running for Congressional District number 5. They'll be talking about their experiences and how their campaigns are running. They're going to talk about the COVID-19 protocols, mutual aid and resources, and also kind of update everybody on this rent strike that's going on out there. Up now, we've got Jason Call and Chris Armitage. We're going to hand it over to Jason right now. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Mute, Jason.
Okay. Yep. I'm unmuted now. Thank you so much, Rhonda. I am running for Congress for the House of Representatives in Washington's 2nd Congressional District. My name is Jason Call. I just wanted to briefly give the geography of my district. My district stretches from Linwood at the Snohomish-King County border and goes all the way up to Bellingham and Whatcom County. So there are 5 counties represented. That is Snohomish, Skagit, Whatcom, Island County, all of Island County, which is Whidbey and Camino Islands, and the San Juan Islands. Major cities in my district are Everett, Linwood, Anacortes, Bellingham, and everything on the islands, of course. Mukilteo, Sedro-Woolley, the west side of Mount Vernon. So you get an idea of where the district is running that I-5 corridor from Linwood up to Bellingham. Thank you.
And Christopher Armitage, do you want to give a little update about where you are at and how things are going?
Absolutely. So we're in Eastern Washington. Our major cities are Spokane and Walla Walla. We go from up to the Canadian border down to the Oregon border, everything east of the Tri-Cities. We're actually 25% bigger than New Jersey as a district. So we're pretty large land geographically. And I'm possibly the only Medicare for All K through 16 universal child care candidate running head to head right now, one-on-one with a Republican in a district that was on the blue to red list in 2018. And we're keeping that fight going because we know we're fighting for what's just and what's right.
Beautiful. Thank you guys so much. So can you guys talk about your own experiences with the COVID-19 virus and with quarantine and the social distancing and all of that great stuff?
Sure. If you don't mind, I would like to say first that I had a friend die last week. A friend, Scott Ryan, who was a community transit worker. I think many people in the area knew him. He was a wonderful guy. He leaves behind a wife and 3 kids. He was a soccer dad with me, and our daughters played on the same team together. And so I would sit in the bleachers or stand on the sidelines with him talking about the game. And we're going to miss him a lot. This is a loss to the whole community, but he was 41 years old, and I think it really hits home. We started out this crisis thinking that it was predominantly going to be affecting older people or people with compromised immune systems, and certainly those communities are at risk. They are more at risk because the reality of this virus is that it does turn the body on itself as the as the infection affects the lungs, the body's immune response is to go after that infection, and the body actually ends up attacking itself, as happens with many other immune system diseases. But what that really means is that this can affect everybody, and you don't know who it is that is going to be affected in such a an impactful way that it would result in death. It's certainly people who have those compromised immune systems are going to be more at risk. We already know that, but the reality is this can affect people who are, for all intents and purposes, otherwise completely healthy. And so it is so important for people to be following the safety protocols that are provided by the Center for Disease Control. They have an entire section on their website that deals with how to protect yourself and protect your community, essentially protect your community. That's really what we're here for. So as far as the direct impact, I already know somebody who has died as a result of this virus. Certainly wasn't nobody's expecting that, but I fear that if people do not take this as seriously as it should be taken, that we're going to end up with essentially everybody knowing somebody who has died from this virus. That is how much of a threat we are under at this particular point in time. So what I have been doing is not going out. I'm lucky enough that I have a job where, for the most part, I can work from home. And when I do have to go out in the field for my job, I don't have to be in contact with anybody, so I can keep myself in my car. When I have to get out of my car, I do not need to be in contact with any individuals, and so my job is safe from that perspective. And thankfully, I am able to work at home, but I know that is not the case for many people. And one of the messages that I want to make sure that we talk about is your life, your health, your safety, the health and safety of the people that you love, your family members, your friends. It is at this point in time not worth putting yourself at risk. People like myself and Chris and other candidates and other progressives are working on some things to where the economic impacts of not going to your job are going to be minimized. So we have in the area here, also in Snohomish County, we had a worker at Boeing who died. We had, we know that the workers at the Everett Boeing plant, there's at least a few dozen of them that we know of who have been infected. And, literally it took somebody dying at that Boeing plant for Boeing to decide that they were going to close the plant for 2 weeks. And it wasn't until Boeing closed that plant in Everett that the governor decided that the state should be put on in a state of essential quarantine and lockdown. So it's tough, and this is a new experience for everybody. I don't think any of us have ever experienced something quite like this, and so I understand that it is hard to take seriously if you have not been directly impacted. But just believe me that if you contract the virus, or somebody contracts the virus, and you are in a loop where you're spreading it around, you are really going to wish that you had, not only for your own health and safety, but for the health and safety of your loved ones and those around you. So I'll let Chris take over from there.
Appreciate it, Jason, and I appreciate what you're lending to this. Our side of the state is a little bit less affected. We're pretty far apart, Jason and I, in the state, and I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your friend. And interestingly, Washington State is starting to be one of those places where the curve seems to be getting flattened thanks to a strong response. And we're seeing, when we look at different states' responses, how even taking this seriously 2 weeks in advance had a massive effect. If you compare Kentucky to Tennessee, for example, they were about 2 weeks ahead on every different type of quarantine. And it's now they have about a tenth as many cases, while they've delivered even more tests. Now, in our district, like I said, just a few weeks ago, we were in the middle of our 30 for 30 tour, where we were visiting 30 towns in 30 days across our district. And in a lot of those small towns, we met folks who were laughing and joking about coronavirus and calling it a Democratic hoax. And it was tough to get that message across, that we do need to take this seriously. Just because, in a similar way to climate change, just because we haven't faced the problems or the consequences in the most direct way personally doesn't mean that it's not a threat. I think as a nation, too many of our elected officials have gotten used to telling scientists to kick rocks. And we need to listen to experts. We need to listen to scientists. We need to have respect for folks who spend years and decades studying things that's relevant and it matters. And even beyond traditional education, we did a Green New Deal forum in Walla Walla a few months ago. And there were hundreds of people in attendance, and many of them were farmers. And they're 400 feet above sea level. They understood that climate change was a threat, and they're used to actually reacting to those things. Now, although we haven't had a larger outbreak on this side of the state, folks are very concerned. Every single day, I'm receiving calls, text messages, emails from folks in this district who are desperate for leadership. Now, my opponent released thoughts and prayers. That's the most that they've done. They've mostly disappeared, besides voting for the stimulus plan that included massive tax cuts and handouts for people who already have more than enough, while penny pinching when it comes to people who are the most desperately in need. Now, instead of just offering thoughts and prayers, which I'm proud to offer as well, I also offer, and our campaign offers, a detailed, in-depth COVID-19 response and mobilization plan that covers the actual national supply chain measures that need to be taken to ensure that we have what we need, because there is plenty to produce, enough ventilators, enough masks, all those different supplies that we need in this country. But we're not using our supply logistics chain as effectively as we could. There are folks in the military who just need to expand into new supply logistics squadrons. We can coordinate this response just like we did after World War II. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people today who are more concerned about making money off of the pain and suffering of working people than actually helping folks, which can definitely be seen by the fact that over the last few years, millions of people have become uninsured, and profits have continued to skyrocket for the pharmaceutical industry.
You know, Chris, one of the things that you mentioned there, with you being in a Republican district and some of the responses from the right-wing side of the country and, the Trump administration to begin with, which is not really something I want to focus on, but I'll just say, my father's a Republican, and he lives in Florida, and, we communicate by text, every now and again. And you're absolutely right. I mean, he's a very sort of libertarian type, doesn't want to be taxed for anything, and, just keep the government out of my hair. And he has been saying exactly the same things that you just described, that, he thinks it's a hoax. He was telling me something like, well, 150,000 people die of stroke every year. And I said, come on, Dad, are you kidding me? We're talking about, something that is a viral epidemic. I don't know if it's just going to take them contracting this. I mean, he's 79 years old. He's in a high risk category. And so it's mystifying to me that some people really have their blinders on to the life-threatening implications of this virus. And I was watching a video earlier today about people who would be more affected by this. There's a very, very good video out there right now by a doctor. His name is Duc Vuong. It's Vietnamese. The DUC is the first name. VUONG is the last name, and he gives a bit of a 35-minute presentation as a medical doctor about how the coronavirus attacks your body in order to cause the COVID-19 disease. And basically, what's going to happen if you get this is you as your body attacks itself, your lungs will fill up with fluid, and this is where we end up needing the ventilators, because your lungs are working at an extremely diminished capacity. You're not getting the oxygen transfer that you need to, because your tissues have been damaged by your own body's immune response, and this is where the need for ventilators come in. And I want to be very serious about this. Just it was eye-opening to me that this doctor, with the experience that he's not, he is talking from direct experience here, is that half the people who get to a stage where they are going to need ventilators are not going to make it, and that's an awful statistic. And I don't want to be. I mean, the last thing I want to do is be unnecessarily alarmist about a situation like this. But it being alarming like that, in a way that says if you have contracted the disease and you get to a point where you need a ventilator, your chances of survival are 50-50. And so, we talk about the need for for the mobilization of these machines, of the masks and the safety gear, to have our factories producing those. Absolutely, we've got to do that, because the number of people who are going to need those ventilators, I'm just going to throw out some math right here. We have roughly 330 million people in the U.S. If that curve doesn't flatten and we end up with a 50% infection rate and a roughly 5% death rate, 5% mortality off of 50% of the people who have contracted that, you're still looking at roughly 10 million people. And that's just a staggering number. But that's what we're seeing out of Italy and Spain. And I don't think, there's any reason to suspect that things can't get as bad here. So again, that's not saying it to be alarmist, but it is saying it to put the message out there that we are dealing with a very, very serious situation, and people need to take every single precaution that they possibly can to prevent themselves contracting it and prevent spread to others. This is not the flu. The flu does not kill people, kill otherwise healthy people the way that COVID-19 has the capacity to do. Again, the way it kills you is it will essentially tire out your lungs, so that your lungs cannot do oxygen transfer. And, there you go. If you can't get oxygen to your body, you're not going to survive. So just extremely, just from a medical point of view, this is extremely serious.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
There is a kind of a statement or question out there for you, Christopher. I know you said that Eastern Washington has not been as impacted. Do you think it's because testing hasn't been as? I mean, do you think it's maybe just testing hasn't gotten out there like it should have been? And then with some of the districts being out there, some of the poorest, so I think it's the third LD is the poorest district, right? Part of CD5. And most don't have insurance. So are they, do you think they're going to the doctors? And then,
Yeah.
and they also, a lot of the service industry, right? And essential workers. So do you think it's not as impacted because you guys are just better at self-isolating? Or do you think that there's just a breakdown in some of the resources that are needed to find out if people are carrying the
Well,
virus?
I know a lot of folks who've actually been denied testing out here in Eastern Washington. We are more spread out population wise. Seattle started and the West Side started locking down earlier. We've actually sent some medical supplies to the West Side of the state. And so there aren't as many. I'm sure there are more cases than have been tested. We had the parent of someone who attends one of the. We have a staff member who has a child at a local school, and the parent of one of those children tested positive. But we've been fortunate enough with our geographic spread that it hasn't been as much of a concern. However, before this even happened, our district was at about 11% unemployment, still massive underemployment. And so economically, we're being hit even harder. We already were far behind economically, very disadvantaged compared to a lot of other places. Some of the poorest areas in this state are in our district right here. We have public schools where 2/3 of the students are on free or reduced lunch. We have counties where 1/3 of the population is under the poverty line, and that was all before this hit. So our ability to be resilient through this is going to be significantly impacted economically.
Guys, I don't know if you guys have been able to delve deep into how the payments are going, but Michelle asks, are SSI recipients going to receive any of the money
Yes.
from that bill?
Yes, Social Security recipients will receive some bailout money.
Excellent, thank you.
I don't want to get overly political, but people are going to need more money than is right now essentially going to be provided to them. But the guy I'm running against here in Congressional District 2, Rick Larson, has already said he does not think that Social Security payments should be increased. I think we really need to make sure that people are, if we cannot get a freeze on rents and mortgages and utilities as we, for at least a few months until we get a handle on this, then we are going to have to make sure that we are providing adequately for people in lower income brackets to be able to make sure that they are paying their rent and not getting turned out. I think one of the things that we absolutely have to do, and this has got to be national, is to make sure that there are absolutely no evictions during this time of crisis, and we also have to make sure that we're providing for our homeless populations, which are also going to be deeply affected by this. And of course, they're not going to have insurance. I am concerned, if we want to talk about sort of a larger scale of policy. I am concerned that we have a for-profit health insurance system right now that is not sort of freely allowing people who feel like they need to get tested, who feel like they might have been exposed, even if they're not showing symptoms. I mean, realistically, we want to make sure that everybody who has possibly come in touch with this virus or is showing symptoms, that they have access to testing. And right now, that testing is not available. I think we, in addition to ramping up production of ventilators and safety gear, we have got to make sure that we have testing kits available for everybody. And so the other thing I want to throw in towards this is this has got to be a no profit situation. We are in national crisis. We are looking at needing wartime style mobilization on this. And if we remember back in World War II, FDR did not allow war profiteering, and in the same way, we should not allow in any way, shape, or form any profiteering from the crisis. That we need resources to go directly to saving people, and that is the end of the story.
Thank you. From Magnus, there's a question. Does anybody know when the model predicts Washington cases peaking? National peak estimates begin in 2 weeks. Have you guys heard?
I have not heard for Washington.
I know that our curve is starting to flatten, and that affects some of the projections. So I haven't seen any projections from the last few days, which I know significantly impact by telling with how effective our current measures are being. University of Washington recently, I think the 25th, predicted about 80,000 deaths minimum by July. But for the state, I haven't seen the up-to-date numbers released. And I'll also say, as far as our response, the federal government's just throwing up their hands, acting like there's nothing they can do. The Defense Production Act means that we can create and augment medical fluid and gear, equipment production in the same lines as active duty, using private businesses and working with them. Like Jason said, we want to prevent profiteering during this time because there's a lot of folks with dollar signs in their eyes while people will die. Using military transportation assets and personnel to condense the time between production stages and reduce time between production and market, mandate production of required protective gear and equipment, masks, gowns, gloves, ventilators. Those are all things that can be happening right now, where we can be pooling all of our resources to get that done in a very effective way. Because in 2020, our logistics supply chains of private companies are not intersectional. We need to be able to operate on a federal level to maximize the production for life-saving equipment. And for those who have concerns about negative impacts to the economy on that, well, in World War II, it seemed to work out all right. When we need to mobilize, when we need to act because of an existential threat, those are when we thrive. Those are when we don't just survive, but we benefit as a species because we're coming together and acting as one. But right now, we have states fighting against each other.
What do you?
I was just going to say, I read a report earlier that in the state of Texas, even though I think they've said that people should not be gathering in groups larger than 10, that people are openly thwarting that for religious purposes, for entertainment purposes. And the governor of Texas is not taking any punitive action at all. So, you know, if you want to do a comparison of a state that is going to take it seriously in terms of flattening that curve and making sure people's contact are limited, versus a state that is not taking it seriously, you know, I am concerned about what Texas is going to look like in terms of cases 2 weeks from now. You know, the science the statistics will show us how serious, in retrospect, and unfortunately in retrospect, how serious those warnings and those guidelines were, and we will see the results when they are not followed.
Thank you, guys. So here's another question. Franklin is asking this. Says, what is the rest of the world doing that we aren't doing? So I want to maybe add to that. What do you see that's successful that the rest of the world is doing that we're not doing? What's the things that you think we should be doing, or why are they more successful in other countries possibly than we are going to be here?
You want to handle that, Chris?
Yes, thank you, Jason. And I should mention too, part of my background is disaster and preparedness, emergency response. My master's is in Homeland Security. I worked in the incident command system. I created quick reaction checklists for large, massive civilian, multi-agency and military exercises where we prepared for things like pandemics, mostly security measures related to them, or chemical and biological weapons attacks. So it is something I consider myself a subject matter expert in. South Korea and the United States had our first case on the same day. They from very early on, because they have universal single payer healthcare, they were able to mobilize nationalized supply chain and focus on testing people. They've tested millions and millions more people than us. This is going to be dragged out a long time. And because of the foreign policy decisions of our administration, right now, we have burned bridges. There are countries on this earth that have seen the America First policies and are now going to be happy to watch us suffer. And I hope that they decide to be more generous than we were with them, because I don't think that the current administration was interested in good times in offering aid or assistance. And part of the COVID-19 response plan that our campaign has put out includes foreign policy, because we do need to be able to mobilize as teams. So as nations that have already effectively flattened the curve, such as South Korea and Spain is starting to, and Italy is starting to, they're going to start to get better. This is going to get dragged out for months, because as places like Washington State flatten the curve, we can't release our standards, because say Idaho decides not to take this seriously, they can come right back over here and get it started up right again. So this disparate, spread out response, this not being unified as a country, is going to drag this out, cause far more deaths, continue to damage our economy because of the greed. As I've said all along, greed is the greatest national security threat to this nation. It is the greatest existential threat. Whether it's an asteroid coming for this planet, climate change, or pandemic, greed is what has prevented us every single way from resolving these issues. And so other countries' prioritization of the actual plans that they have is what has saved them. Because the fact is, there isn't a country right now that's facing this pandemic on a large scale that has had the federal government fail to unify and lead their country. And as our current president said about 6 years ago, whatever happens under your leadership is your fault. You own it, no matter who did it, no matter who you want to blame. But instead, our federal government's more interested in bailing out Wall Street than actually stopping death. And that's what we're doing differently. And to simplify it, I don't want to be reductionist, but that's just a fact.
Yeah, absolutely right, Chris. And you bring up such a good point about not just mutual aid within our own country, but mutual aid between countries, and how much our foreign credential has been trashed by this administration. It's really disappointing. But I wanted to say also, some people have pushed back on that with the nationalized healthcare, because as you know, Italy and Spain both have national health systems. They got caught very early on the front end of this, and I remember, I mentioned that. My friend Scott has died from this last week. He was one of the very first cases in Snohomish County before we sort of as an area really knew what, when he contracted that, we were only just on the front end of hearing what was happening in Spain and Italy. And so while their populations were impacted severely, and I think the mortality rate in Italy was somewhere around 8%. Once they realized what they were dealing with, they became a model for the rest of the world in taking care of their population. So they were strongly impacted because they were among the first to have it spread rapidly. But the response of their government has been to, as best as they possibly can, put everything on hold and serve their public health needs. And that is not what happened in this country. And there's always some arguments for states' rights, but this is absolutely a situation where we need federal leadership. I was asked, it was very recently. I was asked about, I was doing an endorsement interview with the Snohomish County Young Democrats, and they said, do we need a federal standard for this? And I said, we do need a federal standard for this, but the reality is some of our states' governments, in Washington including at this point, are taking this far more seriously than the federal government is. So, we need to take right now, whoever has the most stringent plan for safety, and federalize that plan. I don't know that this administration will do it or is capable of doing it, but that's really the level that we need to be approaching this crisis at right now on a national scale, so that you don't have states like Texas who want to be rugged individuals. Really, like you said, if they don't get their stuff under control, it's even if our state manages to flatten our curve, it could come right back to us unless we have those stringent federal guidelines. So we really have to get that implemented.
Excellent, thank you. There was a couple questions that have brought in Larson's name. So I'm going to just say a couple back to back. So what does Congressman Rick Larson say that those on SSI, why does he say that those on SSI shouldn't get any stimulus help? They're under just as much hardship. I mean, there's more, if you have to stay home, there's more increased, bills for all the things. And especially so then the second one regarding kind of Larson and ish and thing is from Facebook, from Michelle, before you take off with that. How can we pressure people like Larson NAA to accept the Medicare for All would have us more prepared to deal with these kinds of crises?
So that's a couple of good questions, and the reality is I just don't know the answer to what it's going to take for Rick Larson to take those things seriously. He he's been holding a lot of town halls in the area, and he has been addressing the COVID-19 crisis in those town halls as to what is going to happen or what he thinks should happen. And so I got the message from somebody who was on one of these calls, because they're all online right now, that they had asked him specifically about not just should SSI continue to come, and it should, but should there be increased SSI for people who are in need? And his answer to that was no. And as I have said many times, and this is actually one of the reasons I am running for this office to unseat him, is he does not support Medicare for all. And the only reason I can think that he does not support Medicare for all is that he takes a ton of corporate money from the industry. I mean, like Chris says, not to be reductionist about it, but that's really what it comes from. He gets 75% of his funding from corporate PACs, and he does not stand for the progressive policies that we need. So of course he talks in a way that is 100% blameful of the Trump administration, and there certainly is a ton of blame to go to the Trump administration. When you talk about what is it that we need to do in the future to prevent something like this from happening, or to have a better response to it right off the bat, you are talking about the need for Medicare for all, and Rick Larson simply does not support that. And the only reason that I can think is that his corporate donors don't want him to support, because we have a for-profit system.
Speaking of corporate donors, so since corporations are people, shouldn't they only get $1,200 as well?
Rhonda,
that was from the audience. I got to give credit to Franklin on that one.
I would like to jump in as well with the Rick Larson question. So although Rick Larson is a Democrat and my opponent, Kathy McMorris Rogers, is a Republican, I believe there's only one reason that an elected official would take money out of the hands, or food out of the mouth, or a roof away from the head of a working class, working poor, retired person or disabled person. And that's because they think they're better than you. That's why, because they don't believe that you deserve to live. They don't believe that you deserve to be able to pay your bills. They are comfortable taking free government money for the rest of their lives on our backs, while we pay a disproportionate and even an objectively higher amount in taxes than the top 1%, than corporations. And we continue to shovel that money towards them, and they think they're better than you. Any politician, any elected official who doesn't believe that we should take care of the working class and fight for that before they fight for the needs of corporations believes they're better than you.
Thank you. I agree with that.
I could not have said that better, Chris. I really appreciate that sentiment. Thank you.
Yeah, it's totally true. So this is another question. And this is a really good one, I think. What are the rights that we are losing right now while we're being distracted, but not necessarily distracted, but inundated with this virus? Anything behind the scenes that you guys been seeing going on of different what went through the legislatures? Any of our rights being taken away at all?
I don't know. I mean, we are necessarily limited in our freedom to assemble, but thankfully we have the technology to assemble and organize online. I think standards that say you can't be together in groups of 10 or more, I think those are reasonable standards. I mean, we have to practice the social distancing and not. So I don't see that as a loss of right. I see that as more of a responsibility of our citizenry, and that does not prevent us from continuing to be politically active, to be activists, and to organize and to protest our government or exercise our free speech. So beyond that, we are potentially looking at things like curfews. I know some cities and towns have imposed some curfews, as is in a time of crisis their legal right to do if they are doing it to protect our citizens. So I hesitate to look at loss of rights in that sort of Orwellian fashion, because we have to implement, or we have to recognize as citizens the importance of maintaining those safety protocols. So um, uh, beyond that, I don't know, Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fortunate enough to be friends with people who I work very hard to be outside of the echo chambers, and like I know Jason does too, to talk to people from very different backgrounds. And so I have quite a few libertarian and conservative friends, and hearing their concerns gives me a good idea of what they're worried about. And you know what? It's hard to do a lot worse than the Patriot Act. And so there's concerns about rights to assembly and right to people to move around, but we have a public health crisis, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, in that order, have been the judicial standard in this country since its inception. When a court of law has to decide between whether your pursuit of happiness infringes on someone else's liberties, their liberties win, and when their right to life is infringed by your liberties, their right to life wins. So our right to assembly is a lower priority during a global pandemic than our right to be alive.
Mm.
Absolutely. I think that was the point that I was trying to make. Chris made it in a very constitutionally adept manner. So, I don't want people to focus on potential conspiracies about government overreach in this time of crisis. I certainly understand that there is a potential threat there, but I think we all know how to stay vigilant. And on that note, Rhonda, I know I had put in, and I'm having trouble moving this screen on my computer here, but I had put in a document on knowing your rights. What are your rights in a time of crisis like this? I think it's pretty comprehensive. A lot of questions get asked. Can the government make me do this, that, or the other? And those issues are addressed. So I don't know if you have the capacity to share that Google document right now, but I read through it and I felt like it was pretty comprehensive, and I did want to share it here.
Yes, actually, the links to all the things that you shared for me, all the stuff you're going to be talking about tonight, is linked inside the actual YouTube. So when you watch YouTube, you have that drop down where all the information is at. All the links are very easily grabbed and
good. So I'll say again, for people who are concerned about government overreach and really wanting to know what your rights are in a time of crisis such as this, please take a look at that Google document that is going to be listed with the YouTube that Rhonda said.
Excellent, thank you.
I wanted to mention, Rhonda, is it okay if I mention something real quick related?
Absolutely. I'm just helping with the flow. You guys are good.
I want to give credit to my mom, and also during this, I got a text from her saying that she likes what Jason has to say, and and when I was growing up, my mom told me, "Vote with your dollar," and that's something that's always really stuck with me. In our system right now, in this nation, if we want to make sure that we gain our rights back, and those are constitutional rights, for example, our right to search without seizure, or search or seizure without undue reason, we need to use our dollars and our votes. Money talks in our system, whether it's a general strike or a rent strike or refusing to use different companies. And I know what it's like to be too broke to go green, for example. But we need to do what it takes to make sure that our voices are heard. And if that means getting the people who make a lot of the decisions in this country, the people who write our bills and our laws, corporations, to pay attention, we need to do what it takes to hurt their pockets. And right now, we're all suffering. It's time for us to unite. It's time for us to have some solidarity as working class, as people who, the movie Parasite came out in South Korea, and worldwide it's very popular. we actually have more income inequality than South Korea by a substantial margin. And for decades, as you know, my grandparents would have never imagined using a credit card to pay for groceries. Now, the average American has tens of thousands of dollars of debt. It's a house of cards that's been propped up for too long. And if we don't fight to regain our rights and to regain financial stability and to rebuild the middle class, then we don't recover. We don't become number one in anything. We continue to fall backwards and be destroyed by corruption and ineptitude in our political system. And as the Reverend Jesse Jackson said when he was running for president, he said, it's David versus Goliath, and we are surrounded by rocks. Your vote is a rock. Your dollars are a rock. And I want everyone to reach down on the ground and pick up your rock and throw it at that Goliath. And that Goliath is greed and corruption that endangers me, you, people we don't know, our planet, the whole world, and future generations.
That's fantastic. And I want to say that this crisis, I'm hopefully in retrospect, we can come together on this, but this crisis absolutely puts front and center the need for a national healthcare system. I mean, you know, here locally, I told the story a couple of days ago, but here locally up in Bellingham, we had an ER physician who was fired from Peace Health St. Joseph Hospital because he had publicly complained that the safety protocols for keeping both patients and staffers and workers at the hospital safe from infection were not sufficient. They were inadequate. He had asked for better, and he wasn't the only one who said this, but he was the one who was speaking out about it. And Peace Health is one of these large hospital conglomerations, and now they claim nonprofit status, but their CEOs are getting paid millions. The CEO of Peace Health gets paid $1.5 million every year, and their response to one of their medical professionals who is in a position to keep the public safe and was complaining that they were not keeping the public safe and they were not keeping their employees safe, and their response was to fire him. And this, you know, so I don't buy in that situation, I don't buy that this is a nonprofit hospital, because the profits are going directly to their CEOs. So we've got to take a step back and look at the response to this crisis, and how we need to change things with our healthcare system moving forward. It is absolutely vital. We have to get everybody covered. We have to have a system where everybody gets the medical treatment that they need. You know, always the poor and the working class take the brunt of the inadequacies of the system, and we are going to see that here with the coronavirus as well. And so, you know, just as a matter of what are we about as a country, what are our priorities as a country, we have to redirect and we have to institute a Medicare for All program. And I'm really hoping, you know, it's not, people say that sometimes you got to hit rock bottom before you realize that changes need to be made. The sad part about it is, if this coronavirus episode ends up being our rock bottom, where we realize that rock bottom is going to come with potentially 1 million+ deaths. And that's just a sad state of affairs in the richest country in the world.
Yeah, totally agree. So Michelle DeVilliers has asked, and this is a good one because I know it's something that you're going to be talking about, you know, was going to talk about tonight anyway, has anyone heard about domestic violence incidences increasing due to having to be home? And then if so, is there any safe place for families? And then the last one is, and how is ICE functioning now?
Well, as we've left families behind, victims of domestic violence and abuse, I don't think there's been any sort of a concerted effort to actually bring help or aid to those folks. And it's shameful. And if folks on this want to get a hold of us on Twitter, I will be happy to participate. I'm former military law enforcement. I responded to my fair share of assaults, domestic violence, child abuse. And that is something that needs to be addressed. And I would like for our national community and those who are watching to help us figure out what we can do to address it. Now, as
Just
far
real
as
quick before you go to the next one, somebody just put in that Turning Point and Crossroads for assistance with domestic violence. They're both on Facebook, and there's a hotline number available. We can also call 211. This is just a quick little start process, but go ahead. Next, keep going. I apologize.
And that's fantastic. We're going to share those on all our social media to make sure people know. I appreciate whoever gave us that information. Now, as far as ICE, they are continuing to abduct people, and that's actually what they do. I've met folks who talked about how they go to a courthouse to pay a traffic ticket, and then they walk outside, and a family is out there, and ICE agents will be in plain clothes, pull up in an unmarked van, and grab one of the family members and throw them in the back of the van. And 3 days later, that family gets a call saying, hey, that wasn't a kidnapping. It was ICE taking that family member. And that continues because when it comes to cruelty, our government continues to operate plenty effectively. When it comes to life-saving measures, leave that up to the public, leave that up to rugged individualism. We have socialism for cruelty, and we have rugged individualist capitalist aid.
And to follow up on that, there is no doubt in anybody's minds that the conditions in the ICE camps are rampant for transmission of this virus. You got to say that an agency that is willing to throw kids in cages, we heard stories months ago of detainees being forced to drink toilet water, and these were confirmed. You know quite well that these agencies are not doing what they need to do to prevent the spread of transmission, and that is going to be. And so, to transition from that also to our prison population and the health and safety conditions in our prison population that we know are substandard. We have absolutely, being in jail, being in prison for, whatever your crime is, whatever your sentence is, should not turn into a life sentence for, or a death sentence, I should say, through contraction of this virus, because we are unable to keep those populations safe. So I think that, I'm somebody who supports legalization of cannabis at the federal level, and I certainly believe that right now is a time to start looking at all of these jail sentences and say we do not have the capacity to keep people safe. And for those who are nonviolent offenders, my opinion right now is that we've got to send them home to be with their families, to be safe with their families, to take care of their families, and to make sure that they have the resources as individuals to stay safe. We're not getting the job done with ICE, and we're not getting the job done with our general prison population.
I think that's a great point, Jason. I really appreciate you bringing up the importance of expunging the records and releasing all nonviolent drug offenders, because we have 2.2 million people in jail, and half of them are nonviolent drug offenders. Now, the first victims in the Holocaust were elderly, immunosuppressed folks and children. And it's because they were sleeping on cement floors, they weren't given sanitary supplies, they weren't allowed to wash. And that sounds strikingly familiar, doesn't it? Especially for the 60,000 children we currently have in cages. Now, 3 months ago, or no, about a month and a half ago, 2018 National Teacher of the Year, Mandy Manning, and myself visited the Tacoma ICE detention facility. And we met with a woman there named Carlina Dawson. She said she was okay with us using her name publicly. She leads hunger strikes there, and she stands up with the other prisoners. Now, what she told us is that they get their clothes washed maybe once a month. They are at a maximum go outside in the sunlight and get fresh air once for an hour a month. And part of that's because that for-profit facility doesn't have enough outdoor recreation area. They chose to expand their parking lot instead of expanding the outdoor recreation area. They are, again, dirty clothes. They don't get to shower very often. A lot of them are sick, especially the ICE facility. The Tacoma facility is supposed to be one of the better ones. And they regularly, because they have a lot of people who are very sick. And so they have people there who have cancer, who have diabetes, and they rarely get any medicine that they need. Very often they have to go without. And they're also given terrible diets of pure starch foods with no accountability and no oversight. And when people die in these facilities, the videos are destroyed. And that's the world we live in right now.
Oh, that is horrible. Thank you for that. So there's a question from Al Walski. What are the things that are most effective at killing the virus? Lysol, sanitizer, rubbing alcohol, pine sol, heat, cold. Somebody else asked about like blue lights. What are they called?
My honest advice, clean your surfaces, use Lysol. They're all going to work fine. The nations that have had the most effective response, the most effective flattening of the curve, are the nations that have widespread mask use. You can make yourself a mask. There are YouTube tutorials that are fantastic. You make yourself a mask, you wear it all the time. It is objectively shown throughout the world that has been the most effective method on top of cleaning surfaces. So you don't got to go out and buy some fancy equipment.
So
That's
standard bleach cleaning is what I've heard. Lysol bleach wipes and clean your surfaces. And then when you are washing your hands, make sure you wash your hands for an extended period of time. Probably something we're not used to. We go to the bathroom, we do a little 5-second rinse with the water. Get your soap. Soap will lift off the dirt. Rinse
happy
it away.
birthday, right?
Yeah, do you know if ultraviolet light works on like disinfecting like masks and stuff?
A Johns Hopkins study was done on this actually, and they found that many masks can be rejuvenated. I don't know if it was with UV light or if it's just in the sanitization machines that they have at hospitals, but I do know that Johns Hopkins studied that exact thing. And so I'm sure if you look up mask sanitization Johns Hopkins, the study will give you that information.
I also want to say, I think this is a point where it's good to bring in the issues with ibuprofen. I am somebody who takes ibuprofen when I need. It's kind of my go-to anti-inflammatory. But I have read enough, and we've got another link in the YouTube video from the U.S. News article on ibuprofen, and everything that I have heard has said that ibuprofen users are more at risk for complications due to coronavirus than those who use, or there don't seem to be any complications if you're using the acetaminophen or paracetamol, TYLENOL products for your pain and anti-inflammatory. So please check out the link. If you are using ibuprofen, stop using it and use something else.
Excellent, thank you. There's just a couple things that you had down that you wanted to maybe touch on, but then we need to probably go talk about the upcoming rent strike and things that you guys are working on.
Sure.
So just to make sure you guys, got all that, there was something here about really kind of making sure that your legal affairs are in order in case of death, which that's something that's been on my mind that hadn't been before, and it's killing me. And then talk about efforts to produce testing and vaccine. So those are the last two little maybe quick tidbits, and then we'll talk about what's to come.
Well, what I know is that I know that the vaccine producing companies are working day and night to get a vaccine. There may be some antibody testing. One of the real complications with producing a vaccine for this is that this is a brand new virus. This has not been in the human population ever before, and so there is nobody who has any immunity to it whatsoever, and that is necessarily delaying production of a vaccine. I know the government estimates said that it might be a year before there's a vaccine. I have heard that some companies in Canada may have something ready in the next couple of months, but I think all of that stuff is speculation at this point.
I don't have anything to add. I think Jason covered it pretty effectively.
Excellent. I know there's been a ton of questions out there, but we can go on for hours with answering all of those. So if we can just maybe now touch on, there's some mass movements kind of going on, different kinds of either, I see rent strike out there, and I see a general strike, and people saying that, the general strike should be all about healthcare. So you guys want to update on some of the movements that are happening out there that you guys are working? I know the rent strike is a big deal.
Sure. Before I do that, I also want to say to the viewing audience, please contact your local DSA group. DSA is all over mutual aid at this point. They have gathered resources. There is a document or a website that is going to be linked there. It's called usacovidmutualaid.org. That has a ton of resources. I don't want to go through them step by step because they're laid out really nicely. Whatever you think your needs might be, please search through those documents to find local groups. There are listings of local groups in your area that you can contact, but also let me just highlight in my area, Snohomish County DSA and Whatcom County DSA as groups that you can reach out to on Twitter, on Facebook, and find out how to get your local community aid. So, and I know Spokane has a DSA group. I don't know if you wanted to say something more about that before we talk about rent strike, Chris.
Yeah, Spokane food fighters are doing a pretty incredible job, and of course our district's a lot bigger than Spokane. But I know State House Representative Marcus Riccelli has been spearheading a lot of the work with them. And then it's incredible, just Spokane COVID-19 mutual aid Facebook group has been doing a lot of work, and they're setting them up in different towns across the district. And a lot of people are getting active and doing what they can. We've also encouraged people to contact the campaign if they're in need or have things that they want to contribute, and we will help direct those resources around the district as well. Because we still have a volunteer base, and we can activate folks to make sure they properly sanitize supplies, use the Lysol wipes, drop things on porches, whatever people need. We really want to help in every way we can.
Beautiful.
So rent strike is something that came together, at least as far as my involvement in it, with sort of a conglomeration of candidates nationwide, progressive candidates who are running for office nationwide, called the Rose Caucus. And you probably are aware of Joshua Lee Collins down in Tacoma, and also in conjunction with Socialist Alternative. What we are trying to organize here, and you can go to the website rentstrike2020.org to get involved, is that we need to put a freeze, a minimum 2-month freeze, starting right here in April, as we're heading into April in the next couple of days. This is where people are going to be impacted because they have lost income. People are going to find themselves in a position where they can't pay rent, they can't pay their bills. They are potentially facing loss of housing, having their utilities shut off, or the like. And so we are petitioning for a period of 2 months, a complete freeze nationwide, and it would really have to be done state by state. We're kind of organizing it on a state by state level. So there's a petition for every state, that there's a freeze on rent payments, on mortgage payments, on utility payments, until we get stability with our economy, which we do not have right now. And of course, this is going to affect the poor and the working class the most. So if you would like to get involved in Rent Strike 2020, we are asking people to voluntarily, even if you can pay rent in solidarity, to not pay your rent for a period of 2 months. And I know that's somewhat of a leap of faith for a lot of people, because they're like, what if, we get evicted? Well, the whole point of solidarity is, if we all do it together, they can't evict all of us. So I am fortunate enough to be in a position where I only have a small mortgage on my house. But I'm going to be communicating with my credit union who holds that mortgage, that in this time of crisis, we need to put everything on hold to make sure that we get economic stability, and it is not going to be business as usual. So yes, landlords are going to complain that they aren't able to pay their bills because their rents aren't coming in, but we have to realize that we have to tackle this in solidarity as a nation. And so that's essentially what we are seeking: a complete freeze on rents, mortgages, and utility payments. And guess what? They did that in France already. And not only did they do that for rent, mortgage, and utilities, they did it for taxes as well. So if you want to compare yourself to, some other countries that take care of their people better than we do, just look right to France and say they put everything on hold. They decided that people were more important than profits, at least for this period of time where we're in global crisis.
Anything from you, Christopher?
No, it's great. Jason's in his element here. I love it. Organizing, class solidarity. I'm all on board. Appreciate it, Jason.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys taking time out. And this is how we're living now, is online. So, we need to do more and more of these for more and more issues. So everybody keep an eye out. We're going to keep going and keep going. Is there anything you guys, each of you, want to say lastly before we head out?
Well, I would just say, and I'm sure Chris has the same sentiment. If you want to get involved with our campaigns locally in your districts, please contact us. My website is callforcongress.com. There's a volunteer list right there. Although as a campaign, we're in need of donations. I actually don't want people to necessarily be giving money to my campaign that they can't afford. Everything right now has to be focused on making sure that you, your family, your loved ones, your friends are all protected from this virus crisis. And so while Chris and I are still running for office, and we are certainly going to move forward in our capacity as best we can under these limitations, I can speak for Chris here. Take care of yourselves as your top priority. Always take care of yourselves. Take care of your community. When we come out of this, we're simply going to be doing everything we can as campaigners to promote and move our campaigns forward. And I really think that this is a time of messaging. What is the message of our campaign, and that the strength of our messaging is what is going to see us through.
I completely agree, Jason. We've been traveling up this district for almost a year now, our campaign, and we've visited towns that no congressional candidate has ever visited. We've visited some towns that we were told we would get run out of as Democrats. And you know what? We made a lot of friends. I got 30 towns in this district. Once this crisis is over, I can go sit down at the bar with folks and have a good chat and have those relationships build. And so we survive this, we get through this together, and we continue to win, because I know that we're in agreement here. We will not let the ineptitude and corruption of our incumbents stop us from ensuring that they lose their seats. It won't be the disasters they've created will not be what guarantees them re-election. It won't happen.
Exactly.
And so we're connecting with people.
Right. Great way to end that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So please check out the links. Please, everybody, check out the links that have been provided in the YouTube stream. There's some really good information on there. If you're unsure of how to keep yourself safe, please do the reading. The information is available, but you've got to take it seriously.
Yes, you do. So we do have another expanded edition of mutual aid and what's kind of going on and how we can build mutual aid networks in our own communities. Coming up this Saturday at 7 p.m. It'll be live streamed as well. And you can reply and sign up to join us on that on Facebook. But thank you, Jason, and thank you, Chris, for joining us tonight. And thank you, Oz, for doing all of our wonderful work in the background to make these productions as beautiful as they are.
Yeah, can I jump in real quick, Rhonda?
Please.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank everybody, Jason, Chris, Rhonda. This was so good to have you here. I hope that we can get you to do this again real quick, like this week sometime, same time, same channel. because it went over so well. There were a lot of questions out there that we didn't get a chance to answer for everybody. I apologize, but we're going to refine this town hall settings, and I'd like Jason and Chris to stick around for a couple of minutes after the stream so we can talk about it. And thank you again.
Absolutely.
Rhonda, back to you.
All right. Thank you all again for joining us. You should see a lot more coming this way, so stay tuned. And Oz is going to take us out on a little bit of music. Take it away, Oz.
Yay.
One, two, three, one. Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming, for you sink like a stone, for the times they are changing. Come writers and critics, prophesize with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel still can spin, and there's no telling who that it's naming. For the losers now will be later to win, for the times they are changing. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall, for he who gets hurt will be he who has stalled. There's a battle outside and it's raging. It'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are changing. Mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters, they're beyond your command. Your old road rapidly aging, please get out of the new one if you can't lend a hand, for the times they are changing. The line it is drawn, the curse it is cast. The slowest now will later be fast, as the present now will soon be the past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are changing. For the times they are changing.